bring, when for himself a crown he'd skill to gain, for Samos praise contenting the great king. Such was the memorial of his work, which was left by the architect of the bridge. Darius, after rewarding Mandrocles, passed into Europe, while he ordered the Ionians to enter the Pontus and sail to the mouth of the Ister. There he bade them throw a bridge across the stream and await his coming. The Ionians, Aeolians, and Hellespontians were the nations which furnished the chief strength of his navy. So the fleet, threading the Chianian Isles, proceeded straight to the Ister, and mounting the river to the point where its channels separate, a distance of 2 days' voyage from the sea, yoked the neck of the stream. Meantime Darius, who had crossed the Bosphorus by the bridge over it, marched through Thrace, and happening upon the sources of the Tiarus, pitched his camp and made a stay of 3 days. Now the Tiarus is said by those who dwell near it to be the most healthful of all streams, and to cure, among other diseases, the scab, either in man or beast. Its sources, which are 38 in number, all flowing from the same rock, are in part cold, in part hot. They lie at an equal distance from the town of Heraium, near Perinthus, and Apollonia on the Euxine, a 2 days' journey from each. This river, the Tiarus, is a tributary of the Condadestus, which runs into the Aglianes, and that into the Hebrus. The Hebrus empties itself into the sea near the city of Inus. Here then, on the banks of the Tiarus, Darius stopped and pitched his camp. The river charmed him so that he caused a pillar to be erected in this place also, with an inscription to the following effect: "The fountains of the Tiarus afford the best and most beautiful water of all rivers. They were visited on his march into Scythia by the best and most beautiful of men, Darius, son of Hystaspes, king of the Persians, and of the whole continent." Such was the inscription which he set up at this place. Marching thence, he came to a second river, called the Artiscus, which flows through the country of the Odrysians. Here he fixed upon a certain spot, where every one of his soldiers should throw a stone as he passed by. When his orders were obeyed, Darius continued his march, leaving behind him great hills formed of the stones cast by his troops. Before arriving at the Ister, the first people whom he subdued were the Getae, who believe in their immortality. The Thracians of Salmydessus, and those who dwelt above the cities of Apollonia and Mesembria, the Syrmiadae and Nipsians, as they are called, gave themselves up to Darius without a struggle. But the Getae, obstinately defending themselves, were forthwith enslaved, notwithstanding that they are the noblest as well as the most just of all the Thracian tribes. The belief of the Getae in respect of immortality is the following. They think that they do not really die, but that when they depart this life, they go to Zalmoxis, who is called also Gebeleizes by some among them. To this god every 5 years they send a messenger, who is chosen by lot out of the whole nation, and charged to bear him their several requests. Their mode of sending him is this. A number of them stand in order, each holding in his hand 3 darts. Others take the man who is to be sent to Zalmoxis, and swinging him by his hands and feet, toss him into the air so that he falls upon the points of the weapons. If he is pierced and dies, they think that the god is propitious to them, but if not, they lay the fault on the messenger, who, they say, is a wicked man, and so they choose another to send away. The messages are given while the man is still alive. This same people, when it lightens and thunders, aim their arrows at the sky, uttering threats against the god, and they don't believe that there's any god but their own. I'm told by the Greeks who dwell on the shores of the Hellespont and the Pontus that this Zalmoxis was in reality a man, that he lived at Samos, and while there was the slave of Pythagoras, son of Nisakas. After obtaining his freedom, he grew rich, and leaving Samos returned to his own country. The Thracians at that time lived in a wretched way, and were a poor, ignorant race. Zalmoxis, therefore, who by his commerce with the Greeks, and especially with one who was by no means their most contemptible philosopher, Pythagoras, to wit, was acquainted with the Ionic mode of life, and with manners more refined than those current among his countrymen, had a chamber built in which from time to time he received and feasted all the principal Thracians, using the occasion to teach them that neither he nor they, his boon companions, nor any of their posterity, would ever perish, but that they would all go to a place where they would live for aye in the enjoyment of every conceivable good. While he was acting in this way, and holding this kind of discourse, he was constructing an apartment underground, into which, when it was completed, he withdrew, vanishing suddenly from the eyes of the Thracians, who greatly regretted his loss, and mourned over him as one dead. He, meanwhile, abode in his secret chamber 3 full years, after which he came forth from his concealment, and showed himself once more to his countrymen, who were thus brought to believe in the truth of what he had taught them. Such is the account of the Greeks. I, for my part, neither put entire faith in this story of Zalmoxis and his underground chamber, nor do I altogether discredit it. But I believe Zalmoxis to have lived long before the time of Pythagoras. Whether there was ever really a man of the name, or whether Zalmoxis is nothing but a native god of the Getae, I now bid him farewell. As for the Getae themselves, the people who observe the practices described above, they were now reduced by the Persians, and accompanied the army of Darius. When Darius with his land forces reached the Ister, he made his troops cross the stream, and after all were gone over, gave orders to the Ionians to break the bridge and follow him with the whole naval force in his land march. They were about to obey his command when the general of the Mytileneans, Coeus, son of Erxander, having first asked whether it was agreeable to the king to listen to one who wished to speak his mind, addressed him in the words following: "Thou art about, sire, to attack a country no part of which is cultivated, and wherein there is not a single inhabited city. Keep this bridge, then, as it is, and leave those who built it to watch over it. So, if we come up with the Scythians and succeed against them as we could wish, we may return by this route. Or, if we fail of finding them, our retreat will still be secure. For I have no fear lest the Scythians defeat us in battle, but my dread is lest we be unable to discover them and suffer loss while we wander about their territory. And now, mayhap it will be said, I advise thee thus in the hope of being myself allowed to remain behind, but in truth I have no other design than to recommend the course which seems to me the best, nor will I consent to be among those left behind. But my resolve is, in any case, to follow thee." The advice of Coeus pleased Darius highly, who thus replied to him: "Dear Lesbian, when I am safe home again in my place, be sure thou come to me, and with good deeds will I recompense thy good words of today." Having so said, the king took a leathern thong, and tying 60 knots in it, called together the Ionian tyrants, and spoke thus to them: "Men of Ionia, my former commands to you concerning the bridge are now withdrawn. See, here is a thong. Take it, and observe my bidding with respect to it. From the time that I leave you to march forward into Scythia, untie every day one of the knots. If I do not return before the last day to which the knots will hold out, then leave your station and sail to your several homes. Meanwhile, understand that my resolve is changed, and that you are to guard the bridge with all care, and watch over its safety and preservation. By so doing, you will oblige me greatly." When Darius had thus spoken, he set out on his march with all speed. Before you come to Scythia, on the sea-coast, lies Thrace. The land here makes a sweep, and then Scythia begins, the Ister falling into the sea at this point with its mouth facing the east. Starting from the Ister, I shall now describe the measurements of the seashore of Scythia. Immediately that the Ister is crossed, Old Scythia begins, and continues as far as the city called Carchanitis, fronting towards the south wind and the midday. Here upon the same sea there lies a mountainous tract projecting into the Pontus, which is inhabited by the Tauri, as far as what is called the rugged Chersonese, which runs out into the sea upon the east. For the boundaries of Scythia extend on two sides to two different seas, one upon the south and the other towards the east, as is also the case with Attica. And the Tauri occupy a position in Scythia like that which a people would hold in Attica, who, being foreigners and not Athenians, should inhabit the high land of Sunium, from Thoricus to the township of Anaphlistus, if this tract projected into the sea somewhat further than it does. Such, to compare great things with small, is the Tauric territory. For the sake of those who may not have made the voyage around these parts of Attica, I'll illustrate in another way. It's as if in Iapygia a line were drawn from Port Brundisium to Tarentum, and a people different from the Iapygians inhabited the promontory. These two instances may suggest a number of others where the shape of the land closely resembles that of Taurica. Beyond this tract, we find the Scythians again in possession of the country above the Tauri and the parts bordering on the eastern sea, as also of the whole district lying west of the Cimmerian Bosphorus and the Palus Maiotis, as far as the river Tanais, which empties itself into that lake at its upper end. As for the inland boundaries of Scythia, if we start from the Ister, we find it enclosed by the following tribes. First the Agathyrsi, next the Neuri, then the Androphagi, and last of all the Melanchlaeni. Scythia, then, which is square in shape and has two of its sides reaching down to the sea, extends inland to the same distance that it stretches along the coast, and is equal every way. For it's a 10 days' journey from the Ister to the Borysthenes, and 10 more from the Borysthenes to the Palus Maiotis, while the distance from the coast inland to the country of the Melanchlaeni, who dwell above Scythia, is a journey of 20 days. I reckon the day's journey at 200 furlongs. Thus the two sides which run straight inland are 4,000 furlongs each, and the transverse sides at right angles to these are also of the same length, which gives the full size of Scythia. The Scythians, reflecting on their situation, perceived that they were not strong enough by themselves to contend with the army of Darius in open fight. They therefore sent envoys to the neighbouring nations, whose kings had already met, and were in consultation upon the advance of so vast a host. Now they who had come together were the kings of the Tauri, the Agathyrsi, the Neuri, the Androphagi, the Melanchlaeni, the Geloni, the Budini, and the Sauromatai. The Tauri have the following customs. They offer in sacrifice to the Virgin all shipwrecked persons and all Greeks compelled to put into their ports by stress of weather. The mode of sacrifice is this. After the preparatory ceremonies, they strike the victim on the head with a club. Then, according to some accounts, they hurl the trunk from the precipice whereon the temple stands, and nail the head to a cross. Others grant that the head is treated in this way, but deny that the body is thrown down the cliff. On the contrary, they say, it's buried. The goddess to whom these sacrifices are offered, the Tauri themselves declare to be Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon. When they take prisoners in war, they treat them in the following way. The man who has taken a captive cuts off his head, and carrying it to his home, fixes it upon a tall pole, which he elevates above his house, most commonly over the chimney. The reason that the heads are set up so high is, it's said, in order that the whole house may be under their protection. These people live entirely by war and plundering. The Agathyrsi are a race of men very luxurious and very fond of wearing gold on their persons. They have wives in common, that so they may be all brothers, and as members of one family may neither envy nor hate one another. In other respects, their customs approach nearly to those of the Thracians. The Neurian customs are like the Scythian. One generation before the attack of Darius, they were driven from their land by a huge multitude of serpents which invaded them. Of these, some were produced in their own country, while others, and those by far the greater number, came in from the deserts on the north. Suffering grievously beneath this scourge, they quitted their homes and took refuge with the Budini. It seems that these people are conjurers, for both the Scythians and the Greeks who dwell in Scythia say that every Nurian once a year becomes a wolf for a few days, at the end of which time he's restored to his proper shape. Not that I believe this, but they constantly affirm it to be true, and are even ready to back their assertion with an oath. The manners of the Androphagy are more savage than those of any other race. They neither observe justice, nor are governed by any laws. They are nomads, and their dress is Scythian, but the language which they speak is peculiar to themselves. Unlike any other nation in these parts, they are cannibals. The Melanchlaeni wear, all of them, black cloaks, and from this derive the name which they bear. Their customs are civic. The Budini are a large and powerful nation. They have all deep blue eyes and bright red hair. There's a city in their territory called Gelonus, which is surrounded with a lofty wall 30 furlongs each way, built entirely of wood. All the houses in the place and all the temples are of the same material. Here are temples built in honor of the Grecian gods and adorned after the Greek fashion with images, altars, and shrines, all in wood. There's even a festival held every 3rd year in honor of Dionysus, at which the natives fall into the Dionysiac fury. For the fact is that the Geloni were anciently Greeks who, being driven out of the factories along the coast, fled to the Budini and took up their abode with them. They still speak a language half Greek, half Scythian. The Budini, however, do not speak the same language as the Geloni, nor is their mode of life the same. They are the aboriginal people of the country, and are nomads. Unlike any of the neighbouring races, they eat lice. The Geloni, on the contrary, are tillers of the soil, eat bread, have gardens, and both in shape and complexion are quite different from the Budini. The Greeks, notwithstanding, call these latter Geloni, but it's a mistake to give them the name. Their country is thickly planted with trees of all manner of kinds. In the very woodiest part is a broad, deep lake surrounded by marshy ground with reeds growing on it. Here otters are caught and beavers, with another sort of animal which has a square face. With the skins of this last, the natives border their capotes, and they also get from them a remedy which is of virtue in diseases of the womb. It's reported of the Sauramatai that when the Greeks fought with the Amazons, whom the Scythians call oiopata, or manslayers, as it may be rendered, oior being civic for man and pata for to slay, it's reported, I say, that the Greeks, after gaining the battle of Thermodon, put to sea, taking with them on board 3 of their vessels, all the Amazons whom they had made prisoners, and that these women, upon the voyage, rose up against the crews and massacred them to a man. As, however, they were quite strange to ships, and didn't know how to use either rudder, sails, or oars, they were carried, after the death of the men, where the winds and the waves listed. At last they reached the shores of the Palus Maeotis and came to a place called Kremni, or the Cliffs, which is in the country of the free Scythians. Here they went ashore and proceeded by land towards the inhabited regions. The first herd of horses which they fell in with they seized, and mounting upon their backs, fell to plundering the Scythian territory. The Scyths couldn't tell what to make of the attack upon them. The dress, the language, the nation itself were alike unknown. Whence the enemy had come even was a marvel. Imagining, however, that they were all men of about the same age, they went out against them and fought a battle. Some of the bodies of the slain fell into their hands, whereby they discovered the truth. Hereupon they deliberated and made a resolve to kill no more of them, but to send against them a detachment of their youngest men, as near as they could guess equal to the women in number, with orders to encamp in their neighbourhood and do as they saw them do. When the Amazons advanced against them, they were to retire and avoid a fight. When they halted, the young men were to approach and pitch their camp near the camp of the enemy. All this they did on account of their strong desire to obtain children from so notable a race. So the youths departed and obeyed the orders which had been given them. The Amazons soon found out that they hadn't come to do them any harm, and so they, on their part, ceased to offer the Scythians any molestation. And now, day after day, the camps approached nearer to one another. Both parties led the same life, neither having anything but their arms and horses, so that they were forced to support themselves by hunting and pillage. But the Amazons, towards noonday, used to do the following. They would scatter in ones and twos, moving away from each other to relieve themselves. When the Scythians realized this, they did likewise. One of the young men approached one of the women who was alone, and the Amazon didn't reject him, but allowed him to enjoy her favors. She bade him, by signs, for they didn't understand each other's language, to bring a friend the next day to the spot where they had met, promising on her part to bring with her another woman. He did so, and the woman kept her word. When the rest of the youths heard what had taken place, they also sought and gained the favor of the other Amazons. The two camps were then joined in one, the Scythians living with the Amazons as their wives, and the men were unable to learn the tongue of the women, but the women soon caught up the tongue of the men. When they could thus understand one another, the Scythes addressed the Amazons in these words, "We have parents and properties. Let us therefore give up this mode of life and return to our nation and live with them. You shall be our wives there no less than here, and we promise you to have no others." But the Amazons said, "We couldn't live with your women. Our customs are quite different from theirs. To draw the bow, to hurl the javelin, to bestride the horse, these are our arts. Of womanly employments we know nothing. Your women, on the contrary, do none of these things, but stay at home in their wagons, engaged in womanish tasks, and never go out to hunt, or to do anything. We should never agree together. But if you truly wish to keep us as your wives, and would conduct yourselves with strict justice towards us, go you home to your parents, bid them give you your inheritance, and then come back to us, and let us and you live together by ourselves." The youths approved of the advice and followed it. They went and got the portion of goods which fell to them, returned with it, and rejoined their wives, who then addressed them in these words following. "We are ashamed and afraid to live in the country where we now are. Not only have we stolen you from your fathers, but we have done great damage to Scythia by our ravages. As you like us for wives, grant the request we make of you. Let us leave this country together, and go and dwell beyond the Tanais." Again the youths complied. Crossing the Tanais, they journeyed eastward a distance of 3 days' march from that stream, and again northward a distance of 3 days' march from the palace Myotis. Here they came to the country where they now live, and took up their abode in it. The women of the Sauromatai have continued from that day to the present to observe their ancient customs, frequently hunting on horseback with their husbands, sometimes even unaccompanied, in war taking the field and wearing the very same dress as the men. The Sauromatai speak the language of Scythia, but have never talked it correctly because the Amazons learnt it imperfectly at the first. Their marriage law lays it down that no girl shall wed till she has killed a man in battle. Sometimes it happens that a woman dies unmarried at an advanced age, having never been able in her whole lifetime to fulfill the condition. The envoys of the Scythians, on being introduced into the presence of the kings of these nations, who were assembled to deliberate, made it known to them that the Persian, after subduing the whole of the other continent, had thrown a bridge over the Strait of the Bosphorus and crossed into the continent of Europe, where he had reduced the Thracians and was now making a bridge over the Ister, his aim being to bring under his sway all Europe also. "Stand ye not aloof, then, from this contest," they went on to say. "Look not on tamely while we are perishing, but make common cause with us, and together let us meet the enemy. If ye refuse, we must yield to the pressure, and either quit our country or make terms with the invaders. For what else is left for us to do if your aid be withheld from us? The blow, be sure, will not light on you more gently upon this account. The Persian comes against you no less than against us, and will not be content, after we are conquered, to leave you in peace. We can bring strong proof of what we here advance. Had the Persian leader indeed come to avenge the wrongs which he suffered at our hands when we enslaved his people, and to war on us only, he would have been bound to march straight upon Scythia without molesting any nation by the way. Then it would have been plain to all that Scythia alone was aimed at. But now, what has his conduct been? From the moment of his entrance into Europe, he has subjugated without exception every nation that lay in his path. All the tribes of the Thracians have been brought under his sway, and among them even our own neighbours, the Getae. The assembled princes of the nations, after hearing all that the Scythians had to say, deliberated. At the end, opinion was divided. The kings of the Geloni, Budini, and Sauromatae were of accord, and pledged themselves to give assistance to the Scythians. But the Agathyrsian and Neurian princes, together with the sovereigns of the Androphagi and the Melanclini, and the Tauri, replied to their request as follows. If you had not been the first to wrong the Persians and begin the war, we should have thought the request you make just. We should then have complied with your wishes and joined our arms with yours. Now, however, the case stands thus. You, independently of us, invaded the land of the Persians, and so long as God gave you the power, lorded it over them. Raised up now by the same God, they are come to do to you the like. We, on our part, did no wrong to these men in the former war, and will not be the first to commit wrong now. If they invade our land and begin aggressions upon us, we will not suffer them, but till we see this come to pass, we will remain at home. For we believe that the Persians are not come to attack us, but to punish those who are guilty of first injuring them. When this reply reached the Scythians, they resolved, as the neighbouring nations refused their alliance, that they would not openly venture on any pitched battle with the enemy, but would retire before them, driving off their herds, choking up all the wells and springs as they retreated, and leaving the whole country bare of forage. They divided themselves into 3 bands, one of which, namely that commanded by Scopacis, it was agreed should be joined by the Sauromatae, and if the Persians advanced in the direction of the Tanais, should retreat along the shores of the Palus Maiotis and make for that river, while if the Persians retired, they should at once pursue and harass them. This was one division of the royal forces, and this the route it was instructed to take. The 2 other divisions, the principal one under the command of Edonthyrsis, and the third, of which Taxarchus was king, were to unite in one, and joined by the detachments of the Geloni and Budini, were, like the others, to keep at the distance of a day's march from the Persians, falling back as they advanced, and doing the same as the others. And first they were to take the direction of the nations which had refused to join the alliance, and were to draw the war upon them. That so, if they would not of their own free will engage in the contest, they might by these means be forced into it. Afterwards it was agreed that they should retire into their own land, and should it on deliberation appear to them expedient, join battle with the enemy. When these measures had been determined on, the Scythians went out to meet the army of Darius, sending on in front as scouts the fleetest of their horsemen. Their wagons, wherein their women and their children lived, and all their cattle, except such a number as was wanted for food, which they kept with them, were made to precede them in their retreat, and departed with orders to keep marching, without change of course, to the north. The scouts of the Scythians found the Persian host advanced 3 days' march from the Ister, and immediately took the lead of them at the distance of a day's march, encamping from time to time and destroying all that grew on the ground. The Persians no sooner caught sight of the Scythian horse than they pursued upon their track, while the enemy retired before them. The pursuit of the Persians was directed towards the single division of the Scythian army, and thus their line of march was eastward toward the Tanais. The Scyths crossed the river, and the Persians after them, still in pursuit. In this way they passed through the country of the Sauromatai and entered that of the Budini. As long as the march of the Persian army lay through the countries of the Scythians and Sauromatai, there was